and welcome to Resilient Voices, 10-minute stories of newfound heroes. And I'm Brenda Dempsey, the CEO of Book Brilliance Publishing, and Resilient Voices is my giving back project for 2021 in deep gratitude to the NHS for everything they have done during COVID-19 and the pandemic. And today's newfound hero is none other than James Mellor. Hi, James.
Hi, hello, Brenda.
Thank you very much for giving us your time, and thank you very much for saying yes to being in Resilient Voices. My first question is very simple. Why did you say yes to being in Resilient Voices?
It's interesting that if you don't mind me saying, my initial response was going to be to say no, because I thought that my experience over the past year was quite mundane. It was not particularly interesting, and then it was after a conversation I had with a friend of mine who has been working in care homes, going around talking to people, who pointed out that, you know, this has been the worst year in his career as a support worker. And he said it's been the worst year in his life, in fact. And he said, talking to these customers and clients of his who are in their 90s, or some of them are 100 years old.
My goodness.
He said it's been the worst year in their lives, and they've lived through a lot. And he said, if you think you had an easy year or it wasn't a challenge, then you probably haven't thought it through enough, or you know, you're kidding yourself. It's been incredibly tough for everyone, whether they recognize it yet or not. And so I revisited my experiences and thought, actually, you know, there is something of a story here, especially given my job, which is to try and make people laugh in the midst of a public health crisis. That's a whole new dimension to that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and there you said it yourself. It was another story that prompted you, and that's the power of story. And you're an example. I've got goosebumps saying that. You're a prime example of that, when you thought, oh, I don't have a story, and a conversation about another story made you revisit it. So thank you to whoever that friend was, because you did say yes and you are here. So let's talk about what resilience actually means to you. So when you hear resilience, what do you think about? And can you relate it to a time in your life when you had to be resilient?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I see resilience as being something quite distinct from the traditional toughness that or endurance. That's something, if you don't mind me saying, it's something that's especially drilled into young men, that you need to be tough when you grow up. You need to be able to take what life throws at you. And the traditional way of dealing with that is to just, you know, to be hard and hope that stuff bounces off, whereas resilience is much more useful as a response, because to me it means sort of, yeah, absorbing the hits but rolling with them, being adaptable, being flexible, rather than trying to make yourself into this granite wall that stuff bounces off. You're more like one of those skyscrapers in Tokyo that are built to sway with the earthquakes, and then, you know, when the shock subsides, you're still standing, rather than being battered and broken and in pieces. And it's that movement, not just rolling over and accepting defeat, but, you know, picking your battles, not being pig-headed and stubborn, and yeah, getting through by changing and being flexible.
Absolutely. And I love that little analogy of the skyscrapers, because we know that they do have to have a form of movement. And, you know, what a feat of engineering that is, you know, first of all, for the person who, the ingenuity of coming up with the idea that these concrete buildings, and a lot of them are made of glass today, have got to sway, you know. So that's like us blowing in the wind and blowing over. So can you tell us a little bit about a time when you had to be really resilient yourself and bounce back?
Yeah, I mean, we had, my family and I had a very good sort of dry run at dealing with stress and needing to be resilient about 6 months prior to the pandemic starting, when my wife and I, who was 8 months pregnant at the time, were involved in a horrific car accident. We were hit at very high speed on a motorway by someone who was looking at their phone, not the road, and yes, the car disintegrated, left the ground. It was pretty bad, and you know, baby wanted to be born there and then by the roadside as a result. Managed to forestall that slightly, but yeah, at the end of it, my wife, baby had to be delivered early. My wife had to have surgery. I had a dislocated shoulder, one arm out of action. We were both covered in bruises, battered, and then we had a baby to look after.
Wow.
And yeah, it was not an ideal situation by any means, and it was incredibly tough. Just we know from my elder child, it's tough enough raising a baby anyway, but when you're sort of out of action and seriously hurting yourselves, it's that bit harder. And yeah, we realized that, you know, it's exactly this sort of situation that calls for that flexibility, because we realized we didn't ask for this to happen. We can't change that it's happened, but we still have this child to look after who needs constant attention. So we're going to have to do it, and we're just going to have to change and figure out new ways to do this. You know, work out what's really crucial, what's important, what aspects of our lives, you know, can go on hold whilst we focus on this. And it was that swaying, that adapting, being flexible, allowing ourselves time to heal and deal with the trauma of it, because, you know, it played on both our minds that the police and doctors said we really shouldn't have walked away from that situation. They were quite amazed. So yeah, processing ourselves, looking after my young son, looking after my elder daughter, it shifted how we lived our lives. And when the pandemic rolled in the year after, or 6 months later, and brought all manner of new shocks and trauma, we were sort of already in that mindset of, okay.
So I think you're right, James. It was a bit of a dry run, but what a terrible dry run and experience. But, you know, thank the Lord you're here to tell the tale.